we have a couple of approvals to talk about. Let me see. Oh, yes. So we got one NIW approved in just 5 days, premium processing case. It was one of those cases where we expected an RFE and still just got the approval without an RFE. On the other hand, I recently got an RFE for a case where we filed regular processing, expected an immediate approval, and instead got an RFE. So I think the takeaway there is that USCIS is being really, really inconsistent. Along with their inconsistency, I'm actually hearing a lot in the industry right now, whereas over the last year or so, I haven't necessarily heard a lot from other practitioners about denials and RFE trends. Some of them have noted an uptick in USCIS issuing RFEs for some of these tech or STEM-based cases. But now there's a lot of chatter, and I think it's because there is an uptick in denials and in a different or a new set of RFE language being used. So it can be a little bit concerning, and I understand that there's a lot of tension right now, especially with people who are in the process and who are applying for NIW. I will say, and I do warn everyone to expect that kind of inconsistency because you never really know if the government's going to approve or deny your NIW case. It seems like there's a whole set of officers that will approve tons of these cases, and then a smaller subset of officers that are not going to approve them at all. And it's hard to know exactly where your case will fall or what the chances are that they will get the officers that are looking at the NIW more broadly or the officers that are looking at it more narrowly. I think this is actually pretty ripe for litigation. I really want someone to bring some litigation on the NIW because while it's a totally discretionary category and litigation on this topic hasn't been something that's traditionally encouraged by the courts or even allowed by the courts because it's so discretionary, USCIS isn't allowed to make arbitrary and capricious decisions. That means it's not allowed to be arbitrary in who it approves and who it denies. And so if there are wide discrepancies across different sets of officers, that is an area where either the federal courts can step in or potentially the AAO, the appellate body, might issue a new precedent decision so that we'll get something other than Danisar. So it's something to monitor. For the case that got approved, the person was working at a really well-known company, actually a company that has kind of bad reputation in the news recently, but was doing super, super important work in kind of remediating that reputation. And the work that he was doing is clearly in the national interest, very, very clearly in the national interest. He didn't have a lot of these outside qualifications where he wasn't necessarily publishing or speaking or adding, general knowledge to the field like USCIS expects a lot of researchers to do. But he was hands-on engaged in some very important initiatives that were going to improve things not only at this company, but for the industry at large in the US. So these kinds of cases can still definitely be approved. I know that doesn't remove the anxiety around the process because there's always the chance they could be denied as well. But in my view, they're still well worth filing and are still being approved at very high rates.